Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to the dialogues on nonviolence, religion, and peace. My name is Asher Kaufman, and I'm the director of the John B. Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, part of the Keough School of Global Affairs. This event is taking place on the traditional homelands of native peoples, particularly the Pokagon Potawatomi, who have been using this land for education and for other life-giving purposes for thousands of years and continue to do so. As we gather here for this lecture and the dialogue, it is important to acknowledge our own place in the story and practices of colonialism and our responsibilities, not only to make this gesture of land acknowledgement, but also to reflect on Notre Dame's past, present, and future relationship with the Pokagon, the original stewards of this land, and to actively pursue ways to amend this troubled relationship. This is the 27th year in which the Kroc Institute hosts this event, which has been enabled by the generous gift of Marie Yoder and her family. Many members of the extended Yoder-Maust-Meyer family are here with us here at the first front row, and I thank them. And I thank them for their continued support of this lecture series. In the past, we have had a range of speakers who have led these dialogues, from academics such as Jean Sharp, Erica Chenoweth, Tracy West, and Robert Orsi, to practitioners such as Jean Zarou, the Palestinian peace activist and author, Professor Azar Karam, the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, Teilhard Namachanja, acting chair of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission of Kenya, and last year's speaker, the Honorable Dr. Emil Sekuda, the Argentinian theologian and head of the Office of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America in the Vatican. To this illustrious list, we add this year Dr. John Grimm and Dr. Marie Evelyn Tucker, co-founders and co-directors of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. I will shortly invite Professor Drew Marcantonio to introduce the speaker for us in just a few minutes. But before I do that, a few words about the order and sequence of this event. Dr. Grimm and Dr. Tucker will speak for about 45 minutes here, followed by a short Q&A if we have time to do so here. You are all then invited to go to the Great Hall to join us for lunch and to take your lunch also to room C103, where we will continue this event through the continued dialogue with our speakers. And now Professor Marcantonio, who is Assistant Professor for Environment, Peace and Global Affairs, a core faculty member of the Kroc Institute. I'll give you the podium to introduce our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alrighty. So you might wonder why peace, nonviolence, and religion and environment, as we'll talk about today. And hopefully I will tee this up well before our conversation. And I unfortunately cannot say that it is a happy reason why this talk is so prescient in our current moment. Today, 1 in 8 people are directly affected by violent conflict. That equates to 1 billion people, the single largest number of humans ever exposed to direct violence, and the largest percentage of people exposed since World War II. The rate of global environmental change has never been more rapid in our geologic history, other than the asteroid that created the Chicxulub crater, which made dinosaurs extinct about 60 million years ago. From climate change to toxic pollution, exposure to biodiversity loss, the human fingerprint has extended to the most distant biomes of the world. Literally plastic found in the Marianas Trench to fly ash on Mount Everest and the North Pole. In other words, it ain't good. Environmental challenges can give rise to cooperation and conflict, and it's usually the former. We are characterized as a species by our hyper-cooperation, but increasingly it is the latter, particularly in times of weakened institutions, which is no more so today in our formal institutions than it is today, with some of our highest rates of distrust in government and many of the institutions that we usually turn to help us navigate the complex world. So what are we to do? Well, the late Pope Francis was clear Today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And he wrote this in 2015, as we see celebrating 10 years hence, and the question might be, did we move the needle with this call? Well, he answered 8 years later in Laudate Deum in his exhortation saying, yet with the passage of time, I have realized that our responses have not been adequate. While the world in which we live is collapsing, may be nearing the breaking point. In other words, things didn't get better. Pope Leo, in affirming this in his most recent exhortation that just came out 2 weeks ago, tells us that there is no shortage of theories attempting to justify the present state of affairs or to explain that economic thinking requires us to wait for invisible market forces to resolve everything. Nevertheless, the dignity of every human person must be respected today, not tomorrow. And the extreme poverty of all those to whom this dignity is denied should constantly weigh upon our consciousness. So how to attend to religion and ecology through nonviolence? That is our charge for today. And what better people to help us with that charge than Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, who together co-direct the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology and are affiliated faculty with the Yale Center of Environmental Justice in the School of Environment at Yale. Mary Evelyn's concern for the growing environmental crisis, especially in Asia, led her to organize with John Grimm a series of 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard. They were series editors for 10 volumes from those conferences and really set the field on religion and ecology as it is today. And they co-edited, Mary Evelyn co-edited Buddhism in ecology, Confucianism in ecology, and Hinduism in ecology. Wow. Through these conferences, she and John Grimm founded the Forum on Religion and Ecology, which they still run today. And they wrote Ecology and Religion. And with Willis Jenkins, they edited the Routledge Handbook on Religion and Ecology. Are we noticing a pattern yet? They have created 6 online courses on religion and ecology, restoring the Earth community. Tucker and Grimm studied with Thomas Berry and worked closely with him for 30 years, with among many related contributions to include, or in extending their work, they created a multimedia project with Brian Thomas Schwim called Journey of the Universe, which includes an Emmy award-winning film, a book with Yale called Journey and Conversations, and online classes. So this is a multimedia production, really trying to move the needle in a broad way. And John Grimm teaches courses in Native American and Indigenous religions and world religions and ecology. He has undertaken fieldwork with the Crow people of Montana and Salish people of Washington State. His published works include The Shaman, Patterns of Religious Healing Among the Ojibwe Indians, and with Mary Evelyn Tucker, a co-edited volume entitled Worldviews and Ecology. He edited Indigenous Traditions in Ecology, The Interbeing of Cosmology and Community, and co-edited the Daedalus volume titled Religion and Ecology, Can the Climate Change? Wow. No better people than for this particular topic today. With great gratitude, we welcome you to the stage. Thank you so much for being with us.
What a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's hard to put into words, I think, what this effort for peace means in our times, especially. So, of course, we want to begin by thanking the Yoder family and their presence here. 27 years is a long-time commitment, and we work closely with a fantastic Mennonite peace professor at Harvard, Gordon Kaufman, many years ago. And I've also been involved with Catholic Worker, nonviolent resistance, and so on. But I also wanted to just mention that the honor of being here today is that my grandfather in 1946 received the Laetare Medal, which he was asked by Roosevelt to be our ambassador to Spain in the Second World War and keep Spain neutral. So that was a mission of peace and justice for our world. And there are so many ambassadors here at the university, which we want to thank, in the same extraordinary lineage, I think, of peace and justice and the environment. And certainly we begin with Asher Kaufman and his incredible work, and thanking him, Aaron Corcoran, Drew Marcantonio, Ari Woodworth, and all the students who are here absorbing this amazing education. Can we thank the faculty and administrators who've done this work?
It's wonderful to join with Mary Evelyn in expressing our honor at being here at the 27th Dialogue of Religion, Nonviolence, and Peace. These issues are as important today as they have ever been in the human community. In this set of remarks that we're going to make, we will follow three integral ecologists. So this idea of integral ecology is how we wanted to bring our thinking about an approach that Thomas Berry developed in his thought when he said, "There will be no peace among humans until there is peace with the earth." And this sense then of moving from our industrial extractive mindset to a way of living that we associate sometimes with indigenous people, certainly with many of the Anabaptist groups, Mennonites especially, who lived both close to the land and in relationship to one another in a dialogue of exchange. And I think that's very important for this lecture to bring forward. Our approach here may have a seemingly academic ring, and it's intentional in that regard. We wanted to explore two thinkers especially. So it's really a very special honor to be with you.
So we're going to begin just noting, as many have here at Notre Dame and around the world, that this is the 10th anniversary of maybe, along with Rerum Novarum and Pacem in Terris, the most important encyclical from the Catholic Church addressed to all people of goodwill. So that's the context, the umbrella for this talk. And we're going to be speaking about the integral ecology of Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry and their input in many ways into this encyclical, and something that I hope will be taught all across the US, these two great thinkers. So Laudato Si is bringing together science and religion, joining ecology and ethics, which is a huge task, especially in today's world where these are very, very much separated, especially at our University of Yale and other universities like them. So Einstein said, "Science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind." What a wonderful insight. So the environmental crisis we see as a spiritual and an ethical crisis. As our Dean Gus Speth, internationally known, would say, we have the science, the policy, the law, the economics, and the technology to solve these problems, to make the transition to a viable future. What is missing? We need the spiritual energies and ethical directions to overcome despair and disempowerment, especially from youth. We have a whole huge website on religion and ecology. One big section is Laudato Si, another ecological anxiety. Another is action on the ground, many, many engaged projects. And of course, we open up this space, spiritual, not religious, that there's a broad search for meaning and purpose and belonging despite eco-anxiety. How to live life with connection to others, to nature, to the universe, and the divine. We know, as we were discussing at the table, many people know climate change is real. It's not believing in it, but the anxiety that is both with youth and older people. I'm sleepless, aren't you, at night? Okay, the stress of climate emergency we know around the world, well over 90 million refugees, and dealing with immigration is such a huge issue for the church and for others. Climate refugees. Why aren't we understanding this great upheaval from all of the developing areas of the world, the South? But also, as the United Nations Environment says, climate change, major issue, but so is pollution, as we know. Those who live in Flint, Michigan know extremely well. This isn't just international. And we were just in Minnesota. All the rivers and lakes are polluted. They can't eat the fish. So we did a conference on the Yamuna River in Delhi, and hydrologists and so on many, many years ago. These are sacred rivers. But I think many people, is this Arun? Are you Arun? No, sorry. Arun Agarwal, I think, understands this very well, your new appointee. So the third major issue is biodiversity loss and extinction of species, which is something we all have to understand. This is a 6th extinction period. It's not denied. 1998, the Hall of Biodiversity opened at the American Museum of Natural History. On the floor is a plaque. We are in the midst of a 6th extinction period, but we have the possibility of stemming the tide of destruction with restoration, with many other efforts. These are 3 huge issues. So, integral ecologists.
We wanted to talk then of these 3 integral ecologists, Pierre, Teilhard de Chardin, whose large body of thought can be characterized as returning to a cosmic home. Thomas Berry, his sense of a living earth community is his contribution to this discussion. And we all know Pope Francis with Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor in Laudato Si. So exploring integral ecology. This call for integral ecology brings together eco-spirituality and attention to the awe in the face of wonder and beauty of creation, but also eco-justice, awe and action, meeting a need on the ground for the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit and paleontologist, by his date, this helps to locate him, 19th century, 1881 to 1955. And as a scientist and religious believer, Teilhard brings a rather fascinating attention to these issues. Raised in southern France in the province of Auvergne, he joined the Jesuits and went to study both in England and returned to France after he was ordained and entered into World War I as a stretcher bearer. Seeing the suffering in World War I was especially dramatic for his attention to the question of evolution and religion. Teilhard is one of the earliest thinkers to try and respond to the integration of the material world in its ever-changing forms. He saw meaning in the meaning in such suffering in World War I, and his sense then of evolutionary deep time. His focus on paleontology and geology drew from his fascination with fossils and land formation. His attention to evolution brought him into conflict with both his Jesuit order and the larger Vatican dogmatic officials. And so he left in 1923 for a period of travel and fossil gathering with a very important Jesuit in China at the time, Émile Lecent. He returned to Paris, and things were still so unsettled for his mode of thinking that he was exiled by the Jesuits in the Vatican in 1926. So he lived in China for more than 20 years. He traveled across Asia. He wrote one of his major works as he crossed the North American continent to receive a medal in this country. He was involved in the discovery of Peking man, and it's our wonderful occasion to interact with the scientists now in China who inform us that Teilhard is perhaps more well-known in China than he is in the United States because of his involvement in the discovery of Peking man and his work with Chinese paleontologists and really receiving them as colleagues. His attention then to evolution as a bridge in this science-religion challenge is a very important contribution to our discussion today also. His works take up this question. So in his early work, Hymn of the Universe, it's a contemplative reflection coming out of World War I, where he would experience this profound suffering as a stretcher bearer and think that evolution and its tensions were moving forward rather than falling into despair. He also begins as a religious person, a priest. He says the Roman Catholic Mass. He had occasion both in World War I and then in the Gobi Desert when he was searching for fossils. And by the way, extremely successful. The fossils, the dinosaur fossils in the French Museum of Natural History in Paris are those found by Teilhard during those early years of exploration. His Mass on the World is when he was saying the Mass without bread and wine. So he was seeing the world itself as the instruments for sacramental engagement with the divine. So I think that's also very important of what it is we're trying to bring up. Teilhard's contribution to integral ecology, his understanding of matter. He wrote the Divine Milieu as his first effort to explain himself both to his order and to the Vatican. It was not published in his lifetime, none of his religious works. He has 16 volumes of scientific work. They were all published during his life. 14 volumes of spiritual writings. None of them were published until after his death, including The Human Phenomenon, his major work, which is his telling of the story of universe evolution. He died in New York on Easter Sunday, 1955, where he was living in exile from France. He was considered too radical, even after house imprisonment in China during the Japanese invasion. When he returned to France, he was asked to leave. He chose New York as a place of exile, and he worked at the Venner Grant Foundation and also the American Museum of Natural History. His sense then is a capping perspective, his deep reverence for life. He was aware that humans come out of vibrant life systems. In this sense, the perspective in Teilhard's time was that the human was rather a side eddy in the mainstream of evolution. You could not find the consciousness, the self-reflective consciousness of humans. For Teilhard, that was an unacceptable attitude. For Teilhard, the human and consciousness was in the mainstream of evolution. So if humans have consciousness, it's in the vibrant life stream. In that sense, Teilhard also has a proto-ecological dimension. He is not an ecologist. He didn't have that scientific perspective, but he realized the deep inherent relatedness of life and the sense of need for reciprocity. And that's where his dimension of attitudes towards peace and nonviolence are very firmly established. He realized that between the wars, the challenges facing the human were causing such depth of anxiety and the emergence of existentialism as a philosophy that he emphasized a zest for life, inspiring human action in our understanding of the human located in the mainstream of the evolutionary directions from out of the universe itself. So Teilhard then is searching in his theology. He was not a theologian, but he was certainly exploring what is God. It must be as vast as the universe and as warm as the human heart. Intimacy and distance in Teilhard, really interesting, and incomparably more besides, and this is all we can say. His feeling then of the energies of the earth in each one of us through matter, the whole history of the world is reflected. And in these short quotes, you can see the constellation of ideas in Teilhard, where he saw spirit and matter not as separate or different dynamics. They are two dimensions, according to Teilhard, of the same reality. Spirit is, he will use terms like Christic in his writing. He will use cosmogenesis at times to talk about what is drawing matter forward. And I'm always surprised when I think of Teilhard's commitment in his life. One would think he would write most extensively about spirit or the Christic, but he has these moments where he is so attuned to matter. He's very committed to matter. And so this dynamic relationship of spirit drawing matter forward in time, very interesting temporal reflections in Teilhard's thought. Energy and entropy then, energy is that which is binding and matter is subject to entropy and disintegration or gravitational separation. Again, you can feel Teilhard's commitment to matter because you can't have evolutionary change without this entropy dynamic. So he does not see it as an evil or something problematic. Cosmogenesis, I believe, is Teilhard's term that he coined. He uses it in a number of ways, but basically, where is the beginning of the universe? His problematic relationship with his tradition, where the tradition would say the scriptural revelation of Genesis. So Teilhard isn't dismissing Genesis, but what does he do? He connects the cosmos to Genesis to say the beginning of the universe is right now, because the universe is constantly unfolding. We can talk about moments of origin, but this sense of finality, also an omega point, universe moving towards a culmination, and again, this emphasis upon zest for life. His death in 1955, we celebrated the 50th anniversary in 2005, and we had an exceptional gathering at the United Nations. I believe there were 1,500 people attended, and we drew out Teilhard's commitment to the United Nations. He was instrumental and active with those who were establishing the United Nations, especially emphasizing the possibilities for planetary peace through dialogue among nations.
And this was a gathering, actually, of many, many French intellectuals and the head of the IMF and the head of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And there were meetings all across New York, down at Fordham, in Washington, in New York, but also Georgetown. So this was a celebration of one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, who I think still needs his full understanding. So now we're going to Thomas Berry, who also needs that sensibility. So these are some of his books. Instead of an American dream of materialism, he's proposing a dream of the earth. Instead of a universe that is just random and purposeless, he's proposing a sacred universe. And these essays are quite extraordinary. And he's saying, in light of that, a dream of the earth and a sacred universe, we have a great work to do, every person. So this is inspiration for the perspiration, if you will, ideas and action coming together. And Evening Thoughts brings forward one of his greatest ideas, which is a new earth jurisprudence and rights of nature, which we can talk about, that rivers have rights, mountains have rights. And this is moving forward in many parts of the world. Ecuador and Bolivia have this in their constitution. So brief biography here. He was the head of the founding and head of the History of Religions program at Fordham, where we met, thankfully, one of the great gifts of my life, to meet John, but also Thomas Berry. And he was president of the American Teilhard Association, and we took it over for 40 years. A small but magnificent group of people interested in these issues of ecology, justice, and peace. And he had a center in Riverdale along the Hudson River, where we had monthly meetings for some 25 years, potlucks, talks, etc. So community was birthed out of this and still is ongoing. So his contribution, we could say, is eco-spirituality. He says, at its core, even our spirituality as humans is earth-derived. That is a new thing. You can see how it relates to Teilhard. The human and the earth are totally implicated, each to the other, between Teilhard's sense of matter and energy and the spirituality of the earth. This is a transformation and a huge challenge to theology. 2,000 years, wonderful history, one scripture. How do we expand this? The next generation wants to see this expansion and vibrancy. So Berry's spirituality of the earth, he says, if there's no spirituality of the earth, there's no spirituality in ourselves. Major death rebirth symbols are right there in nature. How do we celebrate them, liturgize them, pray with them? Spiritual presence in all of life. We can no longer hear the voice of the rivers, the mountains, or the sea. The trees and meadows are no longer intimate modes of spirit presence. The world about us has become an it rather than a thou. That beautiful Martin Buber sensibility. And this is why rights of nature We have a new website called Living Earth Community, which illustrates the communication, the sentience of animals, of fish, of trees and forests and so on. This is what's impinging on human consciousness all around the world. And it's a great healing and potential for biodiversity protection. So ecology are living systems. Our studies in what we call ecology must lead to such intimacy with our natural surroundings. Only intimacy can save us from our present commitment to a plundering industrial economy, which is what Drew and others are working on. So the key ideas of Barry: we need a new story, not an inflated, illusionary American dream. Not even a scriptural-based story of reality. We need an evolutionary story that integrates the spiritual and the material and a sense of purpose, meaning, direction. So that we dwell in a sacred universe, that we're part of a living earth community, this new website that's just was born this month. So he would say, Earth is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. One of his most famous phrases, everything has interiority. How can the caribou migrate that way? How can salmon find their way back up the river? There's intelligence in nature that we need to be in dialogue with. And this great work to create a flourishing future for both humans and the earth, So this cosmic and eco-spirituality, the Teilhardian cosmic, the Barry earth, an appreciation for the sacred universe out of which earth and life evolved and to which we belong. That's the invitation here. So from the great flaring forth, as Brian Swims likes to say, a great flaring forth out of mystery and the unknown to the formation of galaxies and stars and star bursts, supernova. That's where our life elements come from. The stars are our ancestors, is what we say in the Journey of the Universe film. And the extraordinary images we're getting from Webb telescope, doesn't this expand our sense of wonder, awe, beauty, complexity, and bringing us right here into our Milky Way galaxies, taken in central Pennsylvania? All wonder, beauty, complexity can break through the despair, anxiety, and so on, because it evokes in us reverence, respect, and responsibility.
Reverence brings us to that sense of valuing the complexity of Earth and the profound interdependence of all life systems. We know that reverence is embedded in all of the religions of the world. And now we are also beginning to realize that the spiritual impulse of the human, when we see the rising sun and also when we see the setting of the sun, our day-long work, brings us to an awareness that the life work that we are undertaking is also a life way. And this brings us to what indigenous people understood, respecting all life, a realization that all life is connected. As the Lakota people say, mitaku yasin, all our relations, all life is connected and emerged here on Earth after billions of years of evolution. We're not aware of life anywhere else in our solar system as is expressed on Earth. This feeling then of the Earth, this magnificent world that we live in and gives us our life and our being and our awareness, brings us ever closer to our relationship of bioregions and regions of the Earth, from the highest mountains, which have always been so significant in the religions of the world, to the sense finally of responsibility for the future of life. Perhaps this is the most significant call to us in our times, is to realize we are responsible for the care and continuity of the Earth community. And how we reach that responsibility, we're proposing that Teilhard and Barry's thought provides new portals for approaching again the question of responsibility, because our responsibility reaches in dialogue with the semiotic systems of trees. the signaling of trees between root systems, rhizomes, and fungi. We now know the science community is giving us intimate understandings of what that kind of signaling is, that consciousness. So also in the watery world, the sense of the relationship of mountains, water streams, and the marine life, we begin to be aware of communication now of whales. We no longer, and for some time, have not limited consciousness just to the human. We recognize consciousness in the life community, and we begin to explore it in tandem with the science community to learn what arises in us as we soar with raptors, and fully aware of the predator-prey relationship and beginning to realize what are the co-evolutionary dynamics that emerge in the life and death sequence, where we turn again in an intergenerational handshake to realize that our human children will not go forward into the future unless all the children of all of the species are able to move together into the next generations.
So just to conclude, and lest you think this is romantic, it is very grounded. That's true. That's true. Thank you. That's why I love my husband. No, I was very, very politically active in the 60s. I just want to say, went to college in Washington, D.C., civil rights, anti-Vietnam War, went to Japan with great disillusionment after Nixon was elected. I said, I'm not coming back till he gets out of office. And so this, we're in a period of immense strain and stress, to say the least. And we need something that is going to provide the zest for the transformations, because people don't quite know what to do. This is a change of consciousness and conscience. It's on a macro level, never before asked of the human community. And our educational systems can address this. This is not fluff. This is not in the air. It's an antidote to the sad, bad news that infuses us with dismemberment and inability to act. And we can say, we're just going to say something about this project, Journey of the Universe, and its reception around the world for a whole range of reasons. And that is because, as we know, as Asher and Drew introduced us, this is the most critical moment of human history, not just in our country, but around the world. And I've been working for many, many years with China, which is probably the most important country for the future of our planet. We can talk about that, but they are moving towards ecological civilization. 95% of their people understand the threat of climate change. And those of you who've been there, this is the most developed country in the world. I'm not talking about there's problems and promise everywhere. We now know authoritarianism, they know authoritarianism. So I want to just say something about Journey of the Universe, which has been hugely received in China. I'll say why. So it's indebted to Teilhard's evolutionary perspective and the new story of Barry. It's an Emmy Award-winning film. It's this book from Yale Press. Both the film and the book have been translated to many languages. The first time we showed it in China, 70,000 people watched it before COVID. And that's because the cosmologies of East Asia, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, have this sense we belong to the cosmos. We belong. They actually have this beautiful, heaven is our father, earth is our mother, and even such a small child has a place in their midst. 11th century. You say this today, even in China, they know that quote. Again, I'm not saying it's all realized, it's all perfect. They've done a lot of destruction to their environment, which is why they've changed towards this ecological civilization. And it's in their constitution since 2018. So this perspective is also, I want to just mention, in the Earth Charter, which I hope some of you know. It was a process that came out of '92 Earth Summit. The Earth Charter asks us to leave behind a period of self-destruction and make a new start, but we have not as yet developed a universal awareness needed to achieve this. Now, the Earth Charter has an integration of ecology, justice, and peace. It begins with the ecological integrity is essential for the future of the planet. If the Earth systems unwind, it all comes apart, which is why Thomas Berry said to Leonardo Boff, Leonardo, leading liberation theologian, if we don't have healthy ecosystems, we cannot have healthy people.
And
liberating people. So that's why he wrote the book, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, which is in the series on ecology and justice. 97, he wrote that book. And that has become absolutely critical. I don't know if we have the slides of that. I guess we do. Okay, so the encyclical is this broad invitation to Catholics around the world, Christians, Orthodox, Protestants, Orthodox, Pope, the Patriarch Bartholomew, one of Francis's biggest supporters, but people of all religions, spiritual people, and seekers. The response of the world's religions, positive and affirming. They've written their own statements, wanting to work with the Laudato Si movement. And the response of environmentalists are positive from scientists and ecologists. Bill McKibben, a good friend of ours, said when he came to Yale, this is the most important document of the 21st century. Think about that. He's a Methodist, he's a leader in climate action and so on, and he sees this as that critical. So we've got allies. And the encyclical begins with science.
And it moves towards the gospel of creation, eco-spirituality in that sense, awakening us to the mystery of the universe, the awe at the harmony of creation and the interdependence of all life. In this third chapter, then, the human roots of the ecological crisis, the instrumental use of nature, which Francis builds on the bishop's letters in the Roman Catholic community. So he's drawing on local awareness of this instrumental use and the rise of consumer and materialism and the effect it has had on environments around the planet. And again, we're all aware that Francis is very critical of simply relying on market-based solutions. They are not sufficient in his understanding. So this sense of the fourth chapter on integral ecology, where social justice is joined to eco-justice, his attention to ecology, economics, equity, ethics for action brings him to a solidarity with the poor and refugees, and especially an emphasis upon intergenerational eco-justice. This is an amazing accomplishment that Francis has brought forward in Laudato Si by orienting us then to the larger cosmos.
And grounding us in Earth's living systems.
Nurturing us with water, air, and food.
And transforming us with the energy for change. So we like to think of Laudato Si, but this whole movement towards reciprocity with the living Earth community as orienting, grounding, nurturing, and transforming. And our students at Yale loved this idea because it was a way they could enter in without overtly religious, even or spiritual language.
So let's call this to a conclusion, our remarks, and we have some time for questions and answers. And again, this final slide is our way to redefine religion, if you will, as the activities orienting, grounding, nurturing, and transforming.
Just two quick slides. I can't resist from
Okay.
Thomas, you can read this one.
Okay.
It's this renewed sense of reciprocity with nature in all its complexity and remarkable beauty that can help provide the psychic and spiritual energies necessary for the work ahead. And clearly, this has implications for education, leadership for community empowerment, resilience and inspiration, and the power of art to embody spirituality. So the enduring legacy is integral ecology, ecological spirituality, ecological education, ecological conversion in Laudato Si, but with the influences of Thomas and Teilhard.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, especially on economics, heard of a book called Cathonomics by Anthony Annette. It's based on sustainability, an economy for the common good, based on 10 principles of Catholic teaching. I was wondering if you know of that book, or if you have read it or recommend it.
I have certainly heard of it, but ecological economics also precedes that in the work of Herman Daly, Richard Norgaard, a founder of ecological economics. So we can draw in the circular economy too, of the donut economy that's very prominent in Europe. But I think, thank you for mentioning that, because if we don't change the economic system, we won't make a lot of progress. So.
And I'd just like to draw out the implications of a particular tradition, which I've not read the book and I'm also aware of it. But what's happening now is we're finding in the religions of the world and from different spiritual perspectives, attention to these issues from the standpoint of a particular tradition. I think that's very helpful, because it's not a matter of one narrative, is it? We need multiple narratives that can dialogue with one another from their understanding of these perspectives towards action in the world.
China talks about a circular economy. It talks about a green GDP. There's other parts of the world that are really thinking about this. But if we can bring the tradition and the values from Catholic social teaching and the environment forward, that's really what we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I would love to ask, Dr. Tucker, you mentioned going to Japan when Nixon was elected, and maybe going to stay there until he left office. And we're in a time now where it's a little bit hard to find hope, but you're here. And I'd love to hear from both of you of just where you're finding hope and sustenance right now for the times that we're in.
I mentioned earlier to one of the family members when we were having a wonderful dialogue at breakfast that those communities which have experienced oppression now for some centuries, if not millennia, they provide not simply examples, but they tell us how communities survive. Think of the indigenous communities and the centuries of restriction that has been put upon them, African American communities, where we find hope residing in so many liturgical forms and religious forms. And so those communities, rather than simply positioning them as now teachers of those who have victimized them, I think we need to reflect upon our own awareness of what's happening in our times, politically, ecologically, socially. All of this requires that profound understanding of what gives us spiritual resilience. And I think Marie Evelyn found resilience in East Asia.
Definitely, because 73, 74, I went to teach at a university there. I began to go to Kyoto every weekend. I began to study Buddhism. I traveled all through Asia at that time when it was not developed at all. Took a boat over to Korea and lost my passport there, and it was quite an adventure because it was a military regime. So Asia, almost 2/3 of the world's people, has a lot to teach us, for sure. And I do get inspiration from what's happening in China, despite the problems there. And I do want to underscore what John has said. You know, we white middle-class people have not suffered as the minorities in this country and around the world. And things are in our face now. And so there's a moment of incredible transformation. But we've been to many, many reservations in this country, and we're so thrilled to hear the ongoing work in the Yoder family and many families who are concerned about justice and peace. There's no water on many of these reservations. There's no, unemployment is, 80%, et cetera, and it's totally invisible. So I also get inspiration from what the Chinese have endured. 19th century China was a war called the Taiping Rebellion. 30 million people died. In the Opium War, millions of people died. Then they had the Japanese invasion. Then they had the Maoist revolution and Cultural Revolution. Their resilience is unbelievable, even with authoritarianism and so on. And students there are so eager to learn, so eager to make a contribution. They have an ethics of a common good. We have an ethics of individualism, even individual salvation and so on. That's why I was so attracted to the countries of East Asia. It's a common good. We need both. We need individualism, but we need a sense of common good, common purpose. That's what we're missing in so many ways. Let me conclude, because I do get a lot of hope from being here and seeing what is happening by a family that has made this possible for 27 years, by faculty like Drew and what Aaron and others are doing. This is a very marvelous breakfast to see this. Community-based, as Drew likes to say, programs all across this country will guide us into the future. But my final point is, we've been teaching for 45 years. We don't have children, but we feel our students are our children. And that feeling of what a gift to be able to teach. We like to say it's an intergenerational handshake to the next generations. And they're such an inspiration to us. Let's give it up for the students, shall we?
Thank you. I do have a question actually that is directed for the students. The question is for you. The answer may be for the students. And you reminded me of, I believe it was Father Dowd, who spoke about hope in the midst of pessimism. He spoke about how to retain, how to remain hopeful in this era of pessimism. And I recognize it is a challenge. But I think the framing is really important. Hopeful in this midst of a sense of pessimism. The question that I have is tied a little bit to our breakfast and also to points you were making at the end of your presentation, Laudato Si. At breakfast time, I learned that Laudato Si is a very popular text anywhere but in the United States. That actually Catholic communities and others outside of the United States read it, teach it, try to practice, try to lead their lives according to it. But it does not happen in the United States. And that is really remarkable for me to think maybe it might change now with the new Pope, who is from Chicago. I don't know, but but the question, I guess, for you is, I mean, here you have a captive audience of many young students, and like, can you suggest like action items, a couple of action items, leaving this room and beyond the wonderful presentation that you had, you grounded us at the end with the harsh political reality of the world. And what might be a couple of action items that people who are, have been listening to you can come out of this lecture and say, okay, this is what I'm gonna do in the next day or two, to try and move towards a better future with regards to the environment.
I'll take the first jump into that. As the poet and romantic on stage, I want to call us towards what seems to be an activity which is not as grounded as maybe Asher is calling us. I'm very keen on this phrase that Thomas Berry gave to us. The earth is not, the universe, the earth is not simply a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And I reflect, what does he mean by communion? And certainly as a Roman Catholic priest, I knew he was gesturing towards the liturgy of the Eucharist, but I find that was not his primary intention. By communion, he was moving towards relationship, reciprocity. How do we enter into relationship with the subjectivity of the world? What does it mean to, in the phrase that has a lot of memory dimensions to it, namely hugging a tree? What does it mean to really embrace a relationship with a place that you are fond of, and to be able to go and really listen in that place to what is happening? When I first went to my studies in the late 60s, early 70s, among indigenous people, the Anishinaabe people, and then the Crow, where I've done decades now of study, I went as a good anthropologist. That's not my field, but anthropology taught field work, how to go into the field, participatory observation, keep your distance. And it wasn't until dreams moved me to begin really to ask, what is the ceremony? What does it mean to you as Crow people? And to realize the ceremony I had come to study for years was a communal vision quest. We called them sundances. The Crows say, Awakan, Ashkeze Liswa, Ashkeze, the cosmic lodge, Liswa, to dance in the cosmic lodge. And so this sense of a liturgy which is actively feeling one's feet on the ground of this earth, which is teaching us. So that's my one practical consideration. Attend to something you love that's locally and listen to it carefully to hear what it's teaching you.
You know, it's such a great question. I do think we've had for many, many years 10 things you can do to save the earth. And so we know a lot of them. And it certainly is personal action, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, and so on and so forth. But it's also systemic change, which I think, again, people like Drew are really attending to. How do we really change the society with the economics that you've mentioned so well? There's this systemic change. And we've got to realize we have created something, not just here in the US, but late capitalism is destroying the world. And if you hear the lectures at our School of the Environment, which is over 100 years old, on the state of the world, you would be sleepless. So the systemic change is essential. But as I said at the beginning, the spiritual integration is missing because we, even in all these conferences on the world's religions, they're fantastic. The books I think are great, but we need something even more that's going to raise up the moral force for change. The Mennonites have been doing this for years in the peace movement and anti-nuclear movement and so on. When I was in DC, I saw Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, and Ralph Abernathy. I heard them with a moral force that was, I still have goosebumps when I think about it. And they were willing to go through nonviolent protests. Look at Greensboro, sitting at the counter. And these students, your age, were being beaten and they did not respond. The point here is we still don't have a moral force for the environmental movement. And that is something we have to invent and create. So it's not as though I can say there are these 3 or 4 things. I will say, as a real point of hope, there's a foundation here in the Midwest that wants to make this their central mission to help infuse a sense of spirituality and ethics and moral force into the environmental movement. So that's Fetzer. I can put it out there. That's a huge change. So let's figure the ways that we can imbibe and infuse ourselves with a larger spirituality that is up to this action. And I do think if you look at this Living Earth community, you'll be very inspired. Let me conclude. Why is traditional environmental knowledge of Indigenous people so popular now, even in our science-based University of Yale? 4,000 people last year listened to a year-long course on how forests are managed by traditional Indigenous knowledge. That's a shift in consciousness and conscience. It's a shift in worldview and practice. That's what's happening in our moment. We did a webinar with some of the leading thinkers and writers, including Robin Kimmerer. 4,000 people listened to it. It was the largest webinar ever at Yale. This is a change that's coming toward us. let's pay attention. Let's revive what young people and children know. This is living Earth community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a pessimistic and a hopeful presentation. As I've already told you, lunch is provided, served outside, and in about 15 minutes, we will continue this conversation in C103. So I hope you can stay and join us for this dialogue. Thank you again for your presentation, and thank you all for attending.